Okay, well, hello everyone. We're going to get started. So, first of all, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, and all of you that live here. Thank you so much for coming out to kind of get a little bit of an education about some of this wonderful insurance world. So, first of all, we're going to go to the next slide. For those that most people know who I am, but those that are visitors, my name is Blair. I hate to say this, but oh my gosh, now I've been doing this for 32 years, believe it or not. It just doesn't add up when I'm only 34. So my parents taught me early. My background is I actually have a nursing background and worked the hospitals and then fell in love with retirement communities many years ago. So you'll see some of the things that I've done. Some of my experience have been I've actually, prior to coming to the Kenwood, I worked a lot in opening up rehab facilities, meaning from a construction standpoint, to also understanding really how the insurance world works. And it was an eye-opening experience for me. I knew, but I didn't really know all the backdoor stuff. And then from there, I went and worked with Miller Valentine for several years, and they're a construction company, and I went around the country opening up retirement communities from the ground up and learned a lot from the construction side of it. It's one of the reasons why I'm here at the Kenwood. I actually know the gentleman that built this absolute gorgeous building. He used to bring me on site when there's only a couple of floors open. So to find this building, or to see this building coming up from out of the ground, has just been astonishing. So tonight, what we're going to do is go over the insurance, and on the next slide and on the next page, you'll see some of the things that we're going to talk about. I just kind of highlighted a lot of these things. We're going to go over Medicare. Also, for those of you that have HMOs, I will stop every so often and explain where the HMO is a little bit different, but typically your HMOs, which is United Healthcare, Medicare Complete, your Humanas, they kind of follow the same guidelines of Medicare. So whatever Medicare rules are, pretty much the HMOs will follow as well. There are some differences, but not much. And then we'll talk about some home health and long-term care. This is a very loose talk, so if you do have a question, raise your hand. We've got someone with a microphone that hopefully I can answer your question. So the next slide just kind of touches base on skilled nursing facilities. These are your rehabs, and I think you're all aware of the fact, your rehab facilities, you're going in there because you've had knee replacements, or you have respiratory or cardiac or TIAs, which are small strokes, or the bigger strokes. So you're going in there to get stronger. So that's just kind of some of the SNF. When you see that, it means skilled nursing facility. So just wanted to point that out. I know I'm going through this real fast, but we're going to be hanging on some pages for a long time. So Medicare. And I'm so happy that all the new Medicare cards came out, and it doesn't have your Social Security numbers on it. Oh my gosh, that's been a long time coming. So on your Medicare, there's two parts to Medicare. Part A, there's Part B. Part A pays the big bills. Part A is what pays your hospital stays, okay? Part B typically pays for your doctor's appointments, your blood work, if you need physical therapy, those type of things. Part A is what you really need to pay attention to, and we're getting ready to go into that on the next slide. Part A, so Medicare. This is what we're going to hang on to for a long time. So Medicare says, oh, you're in the hospital and you need me? You need rehab because you need to get stronger? Well, I'll pay for you. And here's the thing you need to remember. You have to be in the hospital and be admitted on paper for 3 midnights. Not 3 days, 3 midnights. Now, here's not the problem. Here's the challenge that I'm running into with a lot of people. Times have changed. You don't automatically get admitted anymore. because the hospitals are looking at cost and things. So sometimes a lot of times that you're not aware of, they put you in observation mode. Okay? They could also put you in a different area that almost looks like an ICU unit, and you're thinking, oh, I got admitted. On paper, you may still be there, and they're treating whatever problem you might be having. But on paper, you're under observation. You've not hit those midnights under Medicare regulations. Okay? So what you need to ask, or have your family ask, when you finally get up to your room, when was I officially admitted? What do you mean I've only been admitted for 1 day? I've been here for 3. The first 2 days you were in observation till they could figure out what they were going to do with you. But in reality, on paper, under Medicare's eyes, you've only been admitted for 1 midnight. Okay? So Medicare says again, if you want me to pay for you with that hip replacement or that stroke that you had and you need rehab, you have to have 3 midnights. Without those 3 midnights, Medicare is not going to touch you. I don't care if you've been in the hospital for 2 days of observation, 1 day admitted, Medicare's not going to pay. And you will have thousands of dollars out-of-pocket expense. Okay? So I'm going to go back over it again because there's so many situations. The other thing, when you get to the hospital, sometimes they'll come up to you, and this recently happened just recently with one of our own folks here. So they're in the emergency room, and they're going to say, you know what, Louise, we need to keep you here. We're going to admit you, but we don't have the room ready right now. And you came in 5 o'clock at night, and it's now midnight. You're still waiting for a room. They're packed. So about 2 o'clock in the morning, come on, we're going to take you up to your room. So you finally get settled in. On paper, you didn't get admitted until after midnight, even though you've been sitting in that emergency room since 5 p.m. So you have to watch your time. Okay, so even though she had hit midnight, she wasn't officially on paper admitted. So you got to hit your 3 midnights. Love my doctors. They're awesome. They are there to treat what you're there for. They're not there to understand your insurance. So you have to take the bull by the horn. And the discharge planners, they shouldn't have to learn everyone's insurance. You have to steer this ship. So when the discharge planners start to come up and speak to you or your family, first thing out of your mouth should be, when was I officially admitted? All right, so you can start ticking off those 3 midnights. So let's say, so you've been in the hospital and you've had your 3-day stay and you're just weak, and you're really having a hard time getting around and just other issues. You might be on oxygen now, what have you. You do need rehab. That's when you're going to go to usually a traditional, they call it a SNF, the SNF that you just saw, skilled nursing facility. All right. So Medicare says, oh, so you've been in there 3 midnights. Okay. Well, you can use me. You hit your 3 midnights, yes. But you need a skilled service. The skilled service means you need a professional to come in to help you with something. So if you've had a stroke, you need a professional, you need a physical therapist. Usually, a lot of times, almost everyone needs some form of physical therapy because you're weak from whatever illness that you might be having. Or let's say you're also now diabetic and you need a nurse to help teach you how to give yourself your insulin. So there's a reason for that you're going into that skilled nursing facility. So you go in, and here's what everyone thinks. Medicare says, guess what? You are eligible for 100 days of all this. Doesn't mean you're going to qualify. 30 years ago when I started this, almost everyone got 100 days. I could count on it. You got 100 days and you were so healthy and felt so much better, you were pretty much doing jumping jacks coming out of that rehab because you got so much time. It doesn't happen anymore. Times have changed. When you go in, you're eligible for 100 days. Doesn't mean you're going to qualify. And now it's a little different. If you do start to get your 100 days, things aren't going well. So now you don't want your 100 days because that means you're struggling. So on an average stay, it's about 2 to 3 weeks. Okay, and what Medicare says is, okay, you've had your 3 midnights. I'm going to pay for you. And if you're there 20 days, this is Part A talking, Medicare Part A says, I'm going to pay for you at 100%. Room, board, physical therapy, your medications, the whole shebang. So they're going to pay. And then if you need day 21 to be there, that's where Medicare says, you're getting a little better, so I'm not going to pay 100% anymore. I'm going to pay 80%. And that's where your secondary insurance, or they call it gap fill insurance because it fills the gap of what now they're not paying, is going to pick up the other 20%. So in essence, your stay is still 100%. But day 21 goes to an 80-20 pay. So 80% Medicare Part A pays, the other 20% your Part B. Or your gap fill insurance, all right? Whether you've got United Healthcare or Blue Cross Blue Shield, what have you. That's why they're filling in the gaps. Now, you don't see much time. When you get into these rehab facilities, here's my number one suggestion that you do. You've got to start right away. As miserable as you feel, start talking to that discharge planner, to that social worker about what's going to happen when I go home. You've got to start that planning. Because here's how the insurance works. So your HMO people, those that have HMOs, your Humanas, United Healthcare, Medicare Complete, one of the things that you've done with your HMOs, when you signed on the dotted line for that HMO, you have opted out of the Medicare system, whether you know that or not. So what they're saying is you don't qualify for Medicare, you're under, that's why they call it United Healthcare Medicare Complete. They try to have you think that you're under Medicare, but you're not. I don't care what they say, you're not under Medicare. So they don't have to follow the Medicare guidelines. Your HMOs typically wants to see you under 3 midnights. All right, very rarely in all the years that I've been doing this do I see someone get rehab paid for by an HMO less than 3 midnights. So the rule of thumb for HMOs, you want to try to get your 3 midnights as well, which is actually is not the rule of thumb within the insurance, but you're better off to be safe than sorry. You don't have to fight as much. So under your HMOs, when you go into that skilled nursing facility, you're not guaranteed anything. You're not guaranteed anything. They don't say, oh, you're qualified for up to 100 days. You're not guaranteed for anything. So especially your HMO folks, the minute you get into that skilled nursing facility, you need to start getting prepared. Because they're going to cut you when they feel like it. All right, so it's a little bit different with Medicare. When you have Medicare, that facility basically calls the shots and cuts off your insurance. And you got to remember, people will say, oh my gosh, I'm still weak. I can't go home. Why are you discharging me? You know, it's still a company and they're making big dollars off your insurance. They're getting a big per diem per day. So they're going to squeeze as much time as they can. Believe me, they do. And I worked on that end. That's a lot of money I'm raking in when I have somebody under Medicare, under rehab. So we're going to squeeze as much as we can and push it to the limits, but we're not going to do fraud, obviously. So when we tell someone it's time to go, we've stretched it as much as we can. Now, you do have the option to absolutely disagree and say, I don't care what you say. I don't believe you. I think I can do more rehab. So one of the things that you can do, you can file against Medicare, and you can file an appeal. I'm not keep trying to bring up, I'm doing this for 31 years, but in all those years, I can count on both hands how many times I've seen people win an appeal. They are difficult because these places, they are trying to stretch it out. It's hard to prove that you need more time. And the people that I've seen win an appeal, you might get an extra 3 days. So, you know, sometimes it's not even worth the hassle. So, okay, you've had 3 midnights. So you need that rehab. You need that nurse helping you with your insulin. Maybe you've had open heart surgery. Maybe you've had a stroke. So you go into rehab, all right? You're going to get about 3 weeks, maybe. You got to talk to that social worker, all right, about discharge plan. So let's back up. You're back in the hospital. Because now I'm going to talk out both sides of my mouth. That is a traditional way it used to be. In the last few years, it has changed. And it has changed for the better. I'm actually very pleased about this. The hospitals were saying, oh my gosh, we're losing all this money. And all these people, they're going to these rehabs and they're getting paid by insurance. How can we capture that back to us? So Christ Hospital has had their own rehab for many, many, many years, and I have used them for years, and they're very good. They're on the 2nd floor. Jewish Hospital now has their own rehab. So what they're doing, Bethesda North does not yet. They have a very specialty unit on the ground floor. They use other facilities. University Hospital, they use Drake, all right? They have their own rehabs. So here's the thing that's different. They tap in, so remember it's Part A that we're still working with. Part A pays the big bills, right? So when you stay in the hospital within their rehab, you're under hospital benefits still. So they are billing at a different level than what a skilled nursing facility can. And they are considered a subacute unit. So what that means, if you can stay within the hospital, and that's what I push for now all the time, all right? You're going to get a lot more therapy. And, you know, remember I said with Medicare, you get about 2 to 3 weeks. You're probably going to be at your best in 2 to 3 weeks if you can stay in the hospital because you are getting so much therapy. If you can stay in the hospital, in their rehab, there you can bill at a different level with your insurance, and you will see a therapist up to 4 times a day. And they're going to get you moving, all right? If you go to a traditional rehab, these traditional places, you basically see a physical therapist once a day and an occupational therapist once a day, and then on the weekends you kind of twiddle your thumbs. And you can't wait till Monday so you can have some therapy. That's the only way they can bill. They can't bill it at a higher level. Whereas in the hospital, they're going to get you moving. They're going to hammer you all afternoon, all day long, get you stronger in a very shorter period of time. So the folks that I can get to go through the hospital rehab, they do so much better. And also, if it's a more complex situation where someone's had a stroke, and that gets a little bit more complicated than a traditional hip replacement, and God forbid if something happens, but it is life and reality, they're within that hospital setting. So my suggestion, if you were my parents, this is what I was supposed to say, I would suggest when you are in the hospital, all right, and they're getting ready to discharge you, you've had your 3 midnights, you tell that social worker, I want your rehab in the hospital. They don't always suggest that to you. I don't know why. That part I haven't figured out. They don't always suggest that to you. They just, and I say this with all due respect, I think they look at your age on paper, you're going to a nursing home rehab. That's my opinion, but don't tell anybody at the hospital I told you that. You need to push for that rehab. If your baseline is pretty good, you're very active, you're probably going to qualify for that rehab. And you'll do so. People that go through the hospital rehab, they are at such a higher level when they come out than those that go to traditional. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with traditional, but they can't give you that amount of rehab every day like the hospital can. That's just the way it is. So Jewish has now opened up theirs. Christ have always had theirs. It's been a wonderful program. I'm hoping Bethesda catches on, the rest of them. So that's something you need to look at.
Tri-Health has their own hospital for Bethesda and Good Sam.
Right.
On 71, that's nothing.
But not within the hospital, though, right?
No, but they can go there.
Yeah, right.
From the hospital.
Right. Right. She's talking about Tri-Health as well, having their own. Now, so I've been preaching to you about 3 midnights, right? If you get your 3 midnights, you can go to that traditional rehab. Okay, if you qualify for the hospital rehab, you don't necessarily need the 3 midnights. I know I make this confusing, right? So, but you can't bank on the fact, oh, well, I haven't had 3 midnights. I'll get into the hospital's rehab. You may not qualify. They might say, no, we can't help you. You need to go traditional. Uh-oh, I didn't make sure I got my 3 midnights. So you need to really follow the rule of thumb of getting your 3 midnights. Because there are situations you're not going to qualify for that hospital rehab. And I can talk about all the situations till the cows come home. I'm not going to be able to cover them all. All right? All right. So remember, you don't necessarily, Foos?
What if you've only had 2 midnights and they want to send you home? What alternative do you have?
Do what?
You've had 2 midnights there and they want to send you home. What alternative do you have?
Okay, so here's what Foos is saying. Or actually Art. I know him so well, I know his nickname. So he says, well, what if you only had 2 midnights and they're going to send you home? Well, you need to let them know what your home situation is. Hey, listen, oh my God, you're going to send me home? I live by myself. I got stairs. I can't walk. Are you crazy? I can't do this. They're usually, if you say to them, oh, you're going to send me home. Well, I do live at the Kenwood and I probably can get room service. And I can probably, the more support that you show them, they're like, oh, well, then I can send you home. So you need to let them know truly what your home environment's like. They're not going to throw you out on the streets. They are really good about making sure you're in a safe environment. And the physicians are really typically good to write that additional order to try to keep you in the hospital for the 3 midnights. I don't have that many problems usually of you not getting your midnight stays. Here's where I have my problems. Usually when people go in the hospital and they get their 3 midnights, the diagnosis is warranted. Here's where my challenge is. Are my fractured pelvis? I don't know if anybody's had a fractured pelvis, but I'm telling you what, it is painful. Because there's no surgery. You got to let it heal on its own, all right? But you can't stand that you don't get 3 midnights. In your shoulder fractures, you don't get 3 midnights. So you need to have preparation to be ready to go home or try to get into that rehab portion of the hospital. All right, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more about what you do and then home health and all that stuff too. Fractured pelvis, shoulder fractures, usually I'm hoping to even get an overnight for you. And then I got to then scramble and get you help to bring you home. They don't hold a lot of water. If you have an advocate on your side, so if you have children, pick out the loudest child that you have. All right, and we all have one of those. And they need, Squeaky Wheel gets the oil. All right, I went through this with my mother, and I know what I'm doing, and I couldn't get her admitted into the hospital. And I am the loudest child. But you know what she kept telling him? Oh, but my daughter's a nurse, she'll take care of me. Okay, fine, we're going to release you then. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, Mom. So, once I explained to her, and we finally ended up, after several hours, got her in and got her admitted. But her diagnosis wasn't that heavy, thank God. It was a fractured pelvis. It doesn't hold a lot of water with your insurance. 30 years ago, I could get you all the time you wanted for it. So, All right, so we'll go over that a little bit more. I do have some more detail on that too, because there are situations they're not going to keep you, and you are coming back home no matter what we do. All right, so again, 3 midnights. Definitely, if you're going to go to a skilled nursing facility, you'll hear the word SNF. That's the common name for it. You could possibly go to the hospital's rehab. You may not have to have the 3-day stay, but then you may not qualify. So always follow that rule of thumb. HMO people, follow the 3-day. All right. And then here's the thing with HMOs for the hospital rehabs. You are a lot harder to get in, and you are typically almost always rejected. You're not going to usually get into the hospital rehabs. It's just a different payment source. The hospital, it's just much harder to get you into the rehabs in the hospital if you have the HMOs. So the HMOs won't tell you that, but I'm telling you that, and I'll tell you that because I experience it every day. So for those that have HMOs, usually you're going to go to a typical rehab. All right. So okay.
You have a question.
Sure.
You said United Healthcare is an HMO?
Yeah, United Healthcare, it's United Healthcare, Medicare Complete, your Humanas, your Cignas, those are like your HMOs. They kind of dictate. And the other thing with your HMOs, you also need to know where your network is. What facilities are going to accept that insurance? United Healthcare, I wouldn't say 100%. Most places will accept it. The more challenging ones are more like your Humanas and your Cignas. They aren't as accepted as much with a lot of the places. They don't have contracts with them.
I'm asking because I have a few.
What happens with your HMOs, they use that phrase, United Healthcare, Medicare Complete. It gives you the illusion that you have Medicare. You do not. You do not. When you sign on that dotted line, you have opted out of Medicare. All right? Even my own husband, so he was ready to switch insurance companies, right? And so I met with the insurance rep, and I told him, I said, don't sign up. Don't sign up. You're going to opt out of the Medicare program. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. So the girl comes over, does her thing, and I ask questions. I said, this isn't true. This isn't true. And I left for work, came home, he signed up, and then he found out he opted out of the Medicare insurance. Wouldn't even listen to me. So got to be careful with the insurance. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit further about, so let's say you end up going into a traditional rehab. Oh, they got some questions back there, Kim. Hold on, Vivian.
What is the standard phrase, rule of thumb,
Kim, can you go ahead?
say,
Yeah, go ahead. Hold on, we're going to get the microphone so everybody can hear real quick. Hold on, Vivian. I feel like I'm one of those talk shows.
thank you. What is the statement or rule of thumb, standard phrase that we as a patient should say if they do not admit us for the 3 days? How do we insist that we want to be admitted for 3 days?
Well, and that you say it just the way you say to me. What do I have to say to you to insist on being admitted for 3 days? Sometimes it's out of your hands, depending on why you're there. And I'm going to go over that a little bit more. I'd say 85, 90% of the time, you're going to be admitted for 3 days. It is the majority and not the minority. But you know what? If you end up falling in that 10%, it really stinks because you still don't feel well. And I'm going to explain to you how you kind of patch yourself up to get you home in a safely manner.
Now we have a United Healthcare. What is the alternative? Like a PPO?
Well, I'm not telling you to change insurance companies. I'm just telling you what my experience has been.
Right.
So most people have your standard Medicare with the secondary insurance.
So what is the secondary insurance?
There's tons of them. There's Aetna, there's United Healthcare sells secondary insurance gap fill. And you know what? We can talk a little bit more about what some of the other options. I'm not telling you to change your insurance. I'm just letting you know how they pay out. All right. So let's talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about. So let's say you go to a skilled nursing. All right. A lot of people don't know these regulations. So Every time you sneeze, the government regulates us. And for good, but some of them I kind of scratch my heads a little bit. So when you get into a skilled nursing facility, and it's kind of like the hospital, so you shouldn't be too surprised. The rules are you have to be seen by a physician on a regular basis, all right? Well, you can barely get up out of bed, so I can't get to my primary care physician. They will assign you their medical director. Every facility by law has to have one, so you'll have their doctor as your primary. If you're in there for orthopedic reasons or maybe cardiac reasons, your specialty doctor, your cardiologist or your neurologist or whatever reason why you're really in there for, they'll still remain as your specialist, but you will then use that facility's medical director, all right? And then also while you're there, your medications are just like the hospital. You can't bring them from home because they have to be packaged and labeled a certain way. So every facility has their own pharmacy that they use that will abide by the state regulations. We have it here as well at the Kenwood, and so your medications and things. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that you'll be using that, all right? I wanted to bring that up. A lot of people don't realize that, and they try to bring in medications from home and things like that. You just can't do that, especially if they're not labeled correctly. Okay. So, been in the hospital, you got your 3 midnights, and you're like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to go to a rehab, and I think you're wrong, and I'm going to go home. I'm going home. Well, I don't think that's a good idea. No, well, I'm going home. I know my house, and I know me, and I got kids to help me, and my neighbors who are going to help me. I'm going home. So you go home. All right? And then after about 2 weeks, you're like, oh, goodness, I made a mistake. I ain't doing so well. All right? And you're having to bring in help. The minute you get released from the hospital, the clock starts ticking with your insurance. Your HMOs do not work like this. This is for Medicare people, traditional Medicare. You have 30 days from the time you leave the hospital to realize you made a mistake to reactivate your Medicare benefits. The moment you hit day 31, Medicare says, I am done with you. You thought you knew what you were doing. I'm not paying for you to go back to a rehab when you've been at home for 30 days. So if you do go home, and let's say you went to a rehab, all right, and you got discharged in 10 days and went home, and you're still within that 30-day window of coming out of the hospital originally, and all heck breaks loose at home, or maybe you did go straight home from the hospital, you got 30 days to get it reactivated. Here's your challenge. I suggest that you don't do that. And I want to tell you, I have been through those situations. I just went through it again about 3 or 4 weeks ago with someone, and I know how to reactivate it, and I have a heck of a time every time to get it reactivated. There is paperwork that I have to get reproduced that I no longer have from the hospital. And you're so sick, and I'm taking you out, and I got to get history and physicals, and I got to do this. I got to be in compliance. It sometimes then, so this person that I did this for came home, which was ill-advised, but they did, which was fine. And about 2.5 weeks later, realized I need to go to a rehab. Well, I knew we were under the 30-day window, and I kind of know what I'm doing. It took me almost 2 weeks to get it done. We were running out I was sweating bullets. I got her in the rehab 2 days on the 28th day. And let me tell you, the other problem and she had Medicare, which is usually pretty easy. The places that she wanted to go, no, we don't feel comfortable taking you now because you didn't come straight home, or you didn't come straight to us from the hospital. So all of a sudden, the places she wanted to go no longer existed because they said no. And the places that did accept her, she really didn't want to go, and I didn't blame her. And so it became very challenging. So you don't always get your choice. If you have Medicare, facilities love Medicare because it's really pretty easy to bill and not manipulate, but to be able to give you your rehab and do the things that you need to do. But once you go home, they're like, I don't think I want to touch you. You seem a little too more complicated now. There's too much of a liability. So we had a difficult time, and it took me almost 2 weeks to get her someplace. Like I said, I got her in on day 28. It was close. So, and I had to pull some strings because I still didn't have all the paperwork, but we were able to kind of fudge it and got her in there. So again, if you end up going home and you realize, okay, I had my 3-day stay, I made a mistake, you got 30 days to reactivate. Okay, I don't recommend that you do that, but you do have that choice. So that does happen every once in a while. All right, so, okay, so you go to rehab. Within the first, I think, 5 days or so, something like that, 5 days, the rehab facility is going to do a care conference. And they're going to have a team sitting around a table. It's going to be the physical therapist, the nurse, the social worker, every once in a blue moon the doctor, but not usually. And the first care conference, don't get your hopes up. They're not going to tell you anything. They're just getting to know you. They say, yeah, I know who you are. And yes, I know you're getting physical therapy, but we don't know any more than that. All right? Where I start to pay attention to the care conferences is the second one. Now we know you. Now we know your limitations. Now we know you're doing well. Now we know you're making progress. That's when you start to need to ask, say, when are you thinking my mother or father or whatever is going home? And you need to start to talk in that social work. That's when I start my discharge planning for everyone, is on that second care conference. And at that time, they will give you an inkling into maybe how much longer you're going to stay. They might not have the exact date of when you're leaving, but they might tell you, you know what, we think you're going to be here at least another 2 weeks. All right, good. Or they're going to say, I don't know, you might be out of here by next week. They'll give you some indication, a little bit. Now, HMO people, you're not so lucky. They're going to say, well, I'm not sure. I think you're going to be here a couple weeks. Here's what happens behind the scenes, and I was on the end of this when I opened up the 120-bed rehab facilities, and I was working with the insurance companies. Medicare, we dictate to them when you leave, basically. HMOs, I send in the paperwork, and I hope I get a call back from someone, and I hope that person's having a really good day and in a good mood, because if they are, you're probably going to get more days. If they're having a bad day, bad mood, get them out by Friday. That's how they work. You don't get a lot of warning. And what I have found with HMOs, because just the way they do things, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, a lot of times you're misguided, and because the social worker, that rehab, they're telling you what they know. And so they don't know anything, and they'll say, I don't know, I haven't heard anything. So you're like, oh, goodness, good, I got more time. Then all of a sudden, that social worker gets a phone call from from that HMO and says, by the way, Mr. Smith that's in there, I know I haven't called you in a while, but I want him out by Friday. Well, that's tomorrow. Yep, I want him out by tomorrow. We're cutting him. You need to be prepared. And you got to start asking discharge planning as soon as you get in, and especially for your HMO people. You guys get cut a lot earlier without warning. All right? So second care conference. I personally, with my folks, with you all here, I start the care discharge planning then. I start asking questions. I start looking at your home environment. What do I need to do? Okay? Because you're going to get that phone call that says they need to be out of here by next Friday, and you got less than a week to get prepared. They don't care how you're looking or whatever. It's the end of it. You can try to do the appeal, but you are probably only get 2 to 3 days if you win it, and that's like hitting the lottery. So, again, on your care conference, you need to be brutally honest. I live at home, like Jerry said, I got stairs. I live in a tri-level. I'm the only person there. I need some help. So, with your rehab, as long as you make a daily progress, Medicare will continue to pay because they can document that. If you start to refuse your therapy because you don't feel well, Medicare says, why am I paying? Why am I paying for you? The other thing that people complain about, you are only allowed out of that facility if you're going to a doctor's appointment. So you can't be running around and get your hair done or going down the street because Macy's got a sale. You got to stay in that place. So I know you're going to be bored out of your mind. And again, on the weekend, sometimes you don't get the therapy, and you just kind of twiddle your thumbs, but you can't leave the facility. You leave, Medicare says, well, why am I paying and you're up at Macy's? You're out of here. So you got to stay. You got to be considered homebound. You got to be considered homebound. You can't be out running the streets. All right. So care conference comes, time to go home. Maybe you're in the rehab in the hospital, time to go home. All right. The hospital and the rehab facility will have a discharge planner, a social worker, there's different names. They will help you plan to go home. All right. Now, once your hospital stops and says you need to go, and once the nursing home says, hey, you need to go, Medicare Part A says goodbye. I am done with you. I'm done with you. Goodbye. Thank you. Now this is where your Part B comes into play. So remember, there's two parts to Medicare, A and B. A pays the big bills, B pays the little. Part B now says, ooh, the big boy's gone. Now I can start helping. So Part B says, I'm going to pay for you, but I'm only going to pay physical therapy, and I'm only going to pay for a little bit of a nurse to come visit you. That's it. So they'll send you home typically and traditionally with physical therapy, occupational therapy. If you had a stroke maybe and your speech is a little affected, they'll also send you back with speech therapy. They'll send you with a visiting nurse. The visiting nurse will see you more often, and Steve, this is where you come into play, is if you not only do you need physical therapy, but you have major dressing changes. So that warrants the need for the nurse to come in even more. If you just need a physical therapist for your hip, you may not see that nurse. Here's the thing that I do all the time, and most people don't need to know. Usually doesn't know to do this. Because I'm really not quite, you have been in a structured environment now for the last several weeks. So every time you need to go to the restroom, you've got help. Every time you need something, you push the button. But now you're going home. And that's a whole different environment. So whenever someone comes back home to their place here, and even for my mom I did this, I'm never quite sure how are they going to handle the more independent environment. I know they set up physical and occupational therapy. I always request, because this order is not written, a bath aid to someone to help you with your showers. All right, it will not automatically be written on your orders. Let me tell you why. So your Medicare, now we're dealing with Part B, and your HMOs pretty much now work all identical at this point. So I'm coming home, I'm weak, I'm going to get physical occupational therapy. I'm going to request a bath aid, all right? And I'll have that physician write that order. And again, you can't expect him to know this, all right? He can't understand everybody's insurance. So say, hey, doc, could you write the order for a bath aid? Oh, you think you need one? Yeah. Okay, fine, I'll write it. They're always good about doing that. Here's the reason why it doesn't get written a lot of times. Not because of the doctor doesn't know to do it. Is that therapy company that's going to be working with you, they don't really like that order on there. Well, they don't not like the order. I shouldn't have said that. They don't always remember to do the order on there. They get a per diem, a pot of money every day to take care of you. All right. So physical therapy comes in, they put their hand in the pot. Occupational therapy comes in, they put their hand in the pot, and all of a sudden that little pot of money is going down. Oh, now you got a bath aid? Oh, she took some money out of there too, and the money that's left over, well, we didn't make as much. Always ask for a bath aid. You can always, if you find out when you get home you don't need them, you can stop it. But then try to get them into the schedule, and you didn't ask for it, sometimes can be, you might say, oh, I realize I need a bath aid now. Oh, well, okay, we've got to work it into the schedule. Well, maybe I can get you a shower by next week. So, you'll be pretty bad by next week, so you need it when you get home. So ask for a bath aid. All right, ask for a bath aid. I always do that. I always like to be safe than sorry. The therapy companies that you work with are awesome. There's a lot of them out there. They're really good, and they will then do the physical therapy. Under your Part B, you will get physical and occupational therapy usually about 6 to 8 weeks. Now, you're not going to get it like in the hospital, and you're not going to get it like in the nursing or in the rehab facility. You're going to get physical therapy one day, and then probably occupational therapy the next day, and they'll keep alternating it. But it usually lasts about 6 to 8 weeks. During that time, the nurse will come over and check you out. Oh, you're fine, and she'll start to fade away. Unless you have maybe dressing changes or you're newly diabetic and she needs to teach you how to do your insulin shots and things, she might come in a little bit more. But if you're just typical and needing physical therapy, she'll start to fade away. All right? Now, in your home health, what I usually find, here's what happens. So you need physical, occupational therapy. I do a bath aid. But you got to eat. And you're going to wear the same clothes for 8 weeks? They can probably stand in the corner after a while, you know? So, but these physical therapy companies, that's not what they're there for. They don't do those type of things. So that's where a private home health agency comes into play. That's where you'll hire in additional help to help you with those day-to-day chores. If you do have them do that, the bath aid that you ask for may have to fade away because you can't have like identical services going on and double dip into the system is what they're saying. So, but a lot of times I find that I'll ask for physical and occupational therapy and I do have to supplement with some private duty. And there's lots of agencies that are out there that are wonderful and they're willing to help. The things that are great with these home health agencies now, they have been very creative in their hours, and you can do what I call split shifts and maybe bring them in to kickstart you in the morning for a few hours, and then you're okay to be left alone, and then bring them back in the evening, and this goes on for a while until you really get back up on your feet. So that's the home health part. So that is, I think the home health, yeah, okay. Oh, long-term care, oh my gosh. I need an aspirin for this one. It's wonderful. If you have it, it's awesome. Long-term care says, hey, if you need me, we'll figure it out in about 100 days. You need to wait for 100 days before I even think about kicking in and paying for you, all right? And then also long-term care says, all right, well, if you need me, I'm going to give you 7 categories. And out of those 7 categories, I need you to need maybe 4 of them, which means maybe you need help with bathing and getting dressed, or you need meals. Some long-term care insurance companies only have 5 categories, and you only need 3 out of the 5 to qualify. So let's say you need it, all right? And then you're going to call the long-term care insurance company, and you're going to ask for the paperwork to start. And you have to wait typically 90 to 100 days waiting period before your long-term care will kick in. During that time, physicians are filling out the paperwork that they need. If you're in a community, such as the Kenwood, we're filling out forms that we need to fill out. We're sending it back, and I guarantee you, they're going to reject it. They're going to send it back. You didn't fill it out right. I guarantee you this. All right? And there have been times where they have sent it back, and I'm like, well, I don't know what I did wrong. I filled in everything. I have sent back the same thing, and I didn't change a thing. Oh, you did it right. And it's the same paper. It will be the most painful ride you will ever experience. I say this to everyone. They don't believe me. And then after it gets kicked in, they're like, oh, my God, Chris, I didn't think it was going to be that bad. Long-term care insurance, after the 100 days, you're typically approved when you need all these services. I've never usually seen them kick in after 100 days. It might be 6 months later. They'll retro it back from the day you activate it, but it's almost like they don't want to pay it. And you never can talk to the same person twice. No matter if you get their name and direct line, you still get someone else. So stick to it. Please don't stop pursuing it. Now, if you have long-term care and you happen to live in an assisted living or a memory support that's licensed, or nursing care, pretty much guarantee 100% you're going to qualify. All right? Because that's why you're there, because you need certain services. If you live at home or if you live in a community in an independent setting, you need to bring in a little bit of help. You can possibly activate your long-term care insurance. It gets a little trickier because you need to prove to them really how can you still live in independent and activate your long-term care. So it's a little bit more paperwork, but I do have folks in my independent as well that has their long-term care activated. But then you also have to think about, do I really want to activate it now or do I need to wait? And I look at age, I look at the reason why you're doing it, probability, all that stuff. So you got to take all that into account. So that's a whole different speech. I just wanted to go over that really quickly. Your Genworths and your John Hancocks and your CNAs, they all, if you have the long-term care, they all kind of work the same. You have to wait the 90-day period. There's a couple little differences between each, but they're all pretty much the same. Oh, all right, last page. I want to make sure you understand you've got to get your 3 days, please. Life will be so much simpler if you do. And for those of you and families, I appreciate you coming out tonight. If you find your parents in the hospital, please call me. Please call the Kenwood. There is a lot that we can do for your parents' return home. So I want to talk about really quick. So there are many times you go to the hospital, and I don't care what you do, Vivian, you scream, you send your loudest child out there, they can't get it done, and you come home. That is where the home healths come into play. And usually in the very beginning, things are crazy. And traditionally what I find that we do, until you can figure it out, a lot of times we'll set up 24 hours of private duty until we can just figure it out. And we'll do it for a little while. And then as a few more days go by, we realize, okay, we don't need this much care. Let's back it off. I call them Band-Aids. And there's some wonderful services that are out in the community that you really need to familiarize yourself. And I'm not plugging certain people, it's just people that I know. Adrian's Pharmacy, they're wonderful to the Kenwood. They've got services and a lot of your pharmacies will do this. You know, sometimes your medications, it's not that you've gotten confused, but your medications have become confusing. And that's two different things. And so there are wonderful services with pharmacies now, and Adrian's does this for us. They'll keep track of your refills. They'll keep track of any prescription changes. They'll fill up a medicine box, and when there's a change, they send a driver over, pick it up, take it back, change it all around, make sure the prescriptions are good to go, bring you back a box that's all accurate. You don't have to worry about a thing. And they only charge like $20 a month or something. So there's lots of different services out there that you need to be aware of. So a lot of times when people don't get their 3-day stay, FOOS, 2 days, come back, I do a lot of Band-Aids on someone until I can figure out how many Band-Aids I can pull off. And unfortunately, sometimes some of those Band-Aids will stay on for a while, but I don't know what a while means. And we need to think about financially. I also look at it from a financial situation because I don't care how much money anyone has in the room. Everyone's got a bottom to their pot. So I like to spend it wisely. And also, I don't want somebody in my office saying, you never told me how expensive this was. So I'm very upfront with people on cost and also laying it out. It's ultimately your all's decision. If that's how you want to spend your money, that's fine. But I'll always give you options. When you start looking at, just very quickly, at assisted living, memory support, and long-term nursing care. Not rehab, long-term nursing care, all right? We are all licensed to run these type of programs. So it's state and federal regulations. So because there are also a lot of federal laws to it, the government says, or the IRS says, why is your rent so high? Oh, you're in assisted living, you got the care built into it. Well, you can start looking at your monthly rate in assisted living, memory support, nursing care as a possible tax deduction for medical expenses. Now, I am if I'm $5 off my checking book, to me that's accurate, so don't go by what I'm getting ready to say. You have got to call your folks that do your financial planning and things. If you ever find yourself in that situation, they will run those numbers and you may be in a situation to where you can deduct $1,500 a month. I've seen $2,000 a month if you live in these programs. So it is a federal, it's an IRS tax, it's a federal law. You can use it if you end up moving to Florida or whatever, so it applies anywhere. So that's just an FYI. A lot of people don't know. Woo, that's my speech. So questions? Oh, thank you. I see some hands. Let me hand the back here. Jerry, I'll get you in just a second.
Hi, I have a Kenwood specific question.
Okay.
It was my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your skilled nursing care here does not take Medicare?
Correct. Okay, let me explain that a little bit better. We do,
Okay.
but I don't think in the way that you're asking. So let me explain. So this is a Kenwood specific question. Here at the Kenwood, we offer independent living, we have assisted living, memory support, we have long-term nursing care, all right? And I'm just, you asked, and I like to be very honest, so I'm afraid if I'm a little brutal here, I'm just going to say it. In our nursing, and I know what picture you're getting ready to get in your head, we do not look like a nursing home, all right? So take that image out of your head right now that you just got in. In our nursing, you still have an apartment. So when you come to visit someone that happens to be in our nursing, you're going into their living room with their furniture. The only thing that gives it away is possibly that nursing bed that we do have for care, all right? Here at the Kenwood, here's what we chose to do. And I will tell you in the beginning, I started here when we opened, so it's been 8 years. I did as a nurse. I've never been in this situation. I had a hard time wrapping my head around it, but now that we've been doing this situation for 8 years, I get it. And I'm glad that we've chose not to do the rehab. Here's what we do. In our nursing, and this is the part where I'm going to be brutally honest, so is I don't want to say to Mr. Smith, who's had that life-ending stroke, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, but you can't have that apartment because I got Mrs. Jones coming in for 3 weeks for a knee replacement. Mrs. Jones is coming back to her apartment. What do I do with him? He needs something more long-term. So we have chosen to keep our apartments in nursing long-term. And unfortunately, those that go into our nursing, and again, I'm just being brutal here, the situation is such you're making it your home. So we have certain rehab facilities that we use, and it's based on a couple things. You can use any rehab facility in the city, all right? But usually families will reach out and say, hey, Chris, what do I do? Mom needs a rehab. We couldn't get her in the hospital rehab, or she needs more rehab than the hospital gave her. Where do you live? I've got communities that are, well, I'm supposed to give you a big old long list, but I try to give you recommendations that I would have my own parents or myself would go to. And we have some very wonderful relationships with some really great rehab facilities. And I've got them in certain areas geographically for families as well. First thing though, and I'm sorry I'm going back to this, and I forgot to mention this is important. So remember the hospitals have their own rehab? So let's say you got in there, okay? And you were there, you only get 20 days. You only get 20 days in the hospital rehab. In a nursing home rehab, you could go up to 100 days, all right? So let's say you go to the hospital and you were lucky, you got qualified for the hospital rehab. 20 days, you are out for sure, all right? So hopefully you're coming home. And a lot of times you are because they're giving you such intense therapy, but there are situations on day 20, you can't go home. You need more rehab. At that point, you're going to go to a traditional rehab facility, and you're going to start on day 21. You don't start on day 1. You start on day 21. So you're automatically going into that 80% Medicare's paying and 20% your secondary. Did I answer your question on the Kenwood thing?
As I understand it, so you're saying if it's a longer term situation that someone
Yeah.
would need
For the short term rehab, we have rehab facilities that will recommend that if someone needs a hip replacement or fell and broke their hip or had a stroke, that you use. Okay. Now remember that's your Part A benefits that are paying for that. Here at the Kenwood, we are more long-term nursing. That's not saying if someone's in our nursing that we're not going to give them some physical therapy because we can utilize and bill their Part B Medicare. But it's their Part A, which is rehab, that we're not doing. So we're not going to let somebody up on a nurse and say, no, you can't have rehab. You know, we're going to give them physical therapy, but it's under Part B, but their room and board is not being paid for like Part A would. And most times what I find when you're in the hospital, I mean, you could come to the Kenwood, but you would pay out of pocket because we're not billing Part A. Most people want to utilize their insurance. That's why I recommend rehab facilities. And now we have better options here in Cincinnati that these hospitals are getting their own rehabs. And these rehabs are just awesome. We're getting some great results from these rehabs. Been very pleased. And the discharge planning has been awesome too. So, did I answer? Okay. Any other questions, Jerry?
What about the respite care that you have here?
Oh, okay, respite. Real quick, that's a good thing. Comment, and I don't want to take too much of your time. I appreciate you all for coming out. My God, I've been jabbing for an hour already. Feels like 20 minutes. All right. What'd you say? Oh, respite. Ah. Okay. There are situations where, gosh, you did pretty good in the rehab, but you're not quite there to go home. All right. And bringing in private duty can be expensive, and maybe you don't want people in your home. So there are places, Kenwood has them as well. We have situations within our assisted living program. They're called respites. It looks like a hotel room that we've set up, and that's all it's for. When anyone comes into my respite, they typically have come out of the hospital or a rehab. They're not ready to go home. They get all the services as if they're living in assisted living, and we're giving them that physical therapy, and we're getting them stronger to get back home. You know, the problem is now the hospital doesn't keep you very long, and the rehabs don't. You just need a few more weeks. So people that come into our respites and assisted living are there for another 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a month before they either return home or they return back into their independent living apartment. We use that a lot. I've got, right now in my assisted living, 4 respite apartments, and we do have folks that are using that that just came out of the hospital. And they just need to get over this weakness. They've done the rehab, but you're still weak. So it's a good service to use, right? Any other questions?
I want to expand on that. They have an apartment in regular.
Well, you still pay.
You still pay
Right.
your
If you
apartment?
go to an assisted living program, the only time your insurance is going to pay if you go to rehab. Anything other than that, you got to pay out of pocket. So, all right. Thank you all. I want to also let you know, especially for our visitors, you know, Kenwood does not have to be an option for you that you're thinking about moving in or you got parents looking to move in. We are a resource for the community, so please reach out and call if you ever have any questions. And families and residents, thank you tonight for coming out. And families, please reach out. If any time you find a parent in the hospital, we'll be more than happy to help you to get your mom or dad back home. All right? So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.